Hi everyone, welcome back. It's been a while since I did this, but I'm back. And this time I want to talk about a sketch that I made a couple of weeks ago. It's a request from Dave McKay or Dave McKay. Dave, sorry, I don't know how to exactly pronounce your name, but this one's for you. You requested me for a talk through this specific sketch. It looks quite a bit different from the photograph that you see, so let's dive right in. Hope you guys like it. All right. The first thing that you see, as always, I start with the photograph itself, and usually I'm inspired by a photo directly when I see it. And in this case, I was really inspired by this Art Deco, or 1980-ish kind of postmodern Art Deco style, with lots of decorative elements that at least make me think back to the 20s. This is, I'm sure, a lot more recent than the 1920s, but it reminds me of it. And I liked it, but the thing that I wanted to change immediately when I saw this is I want to push and squeeze this one into my sketchbook. And as most of you know, I have a vertical sketchbook, and of course I can turn the page, turn it around, and make it in a horizontal way. But since this is actually basically a square, either horizontal or vertical would work, and I can. My choice was to make it a vertical, at least an exaggerated vertical one. I didn't want to sketch this one exactly as is. I wanted to add my own twist to it. So the first thing that I always do is take the photograph and do an isolation pass. And in the isolation pass, I get to remove the background, which gives me a much clearer view of what I want to sketch, of my subject. So in this stage, isolation. Forgot to mention, this great image again is from Masknak. Thank you for letting me sketch based on your photographs and lots of other ones. I'm really grateful for it, and you will be mentioned in my book. But back to the sketch, isolation. First thing is a very important thing to do is remove this background, and this way I can see exactly what my subject is all about. And as you can see, I made it a little bit smaller here, so it doesn't really distract too much at this moment, because I'm going to talk about it later. It's a lot different. I added some stuff. First step, isolation. Then, because I wanted to make this really like flower out, if you will, it like radiate out. You can see that in my sketch here. If I just quickly do this on this small thumbnail sketch, you see that I made it really like it explodes out, if you will. And that's something that I wanted to prepare in the photograph. Not that I cannot do it, but I impose myself a really strong time limit on making these, and for me it's much easier to just help myself in Adobe Photoshop in this case, and prepare the distortion of this photograph as well. So that's when we go to stage 2 and exaggerate. I did not use a filter. I just scaled and squashed and stretched to get a little bit of that directionality going that you see in the final sketch. So you see this radiating out, and also here radiating out again. which makes for a dynamic thing. You even see that in the final sketch. I made this arc and made it even more exaggerated. That is something that I prepared, and the directionality I had in mind. I wanted to do that. So then when I had this established, I thought about adding something, because it's still quite blocky, quite like squarish, even on this vertical page. It fills it nicely, but I thought, let's add something here. And I always have some water tower or air conditioning unit thing going. So that's what I quickly did. I made just a really rough approximation of a water tower, so that I knew, okay, that's something that I want there. And this is enough for me to just start my sketch. So this is basically the starting point for my sketch. And let's head over to the sketch now. I can close off this one now and make this a lot bigger. The sketching part. All right, I did a little time cutting here because I remembered that I wanted to show the line sketch as well. So let's start with that line sketch. It's right here, and for the people who know it, I make these available, a selection of these line sketches available along with the color sketch on my Patreon page. And I also make several ones available on my Gumroad page. I don't know if this one is there, I'll have to check it. But here you can quickly see like the difference between the line and the final. Back to the line sketch. It looks really complex, and if I quickly just put little overlay over it, I'll show you basically how I make the basic line drawing. Or what I think about it. It's not always that I follow a specific rule. You see that my line work is really loose, but I try to get a feel of the shapes, and usually it's like trying to feel around the building and getting the biggest shapes done, because the smaller stuff is nice, but it is in the setup part, it's basically just a distraction, and you don't need that. The main parts here are these arcs. You have this division, if you will, into like 3 sections of the building, and all this detail doesn't matter in the building or in the establishing of your sketch. The most important thing is, okay, you have some foreground elements. I quickly just sketch around that. I add the main lines, and from there I start to like really detail in where I think it's necessary. But these steps, if I make this fully opaque, these steps basically are the way that I set up to sketch, and from there I start to like flesh it out, add all the details, and that makes it look quite complex. But if you have this framework done, just getting back to this one more time, if you have this framework down, the rest is really a lot easier to do, and it's hardly as complex as it looks in this in the final line sketch. From here, I start to build up my shades. I cannot do that in Photoshop. Of course, I can do it in the sketch, and sometimes I record a full sketching process. But for here, I will just explain, and I will explain it on the color version. I start with the really lightest colors, and in this case here, for instance, you have like an E41, which is a very light earth type of color. With all these light shades, I lay these down. You can see traces of them here, and that's basically the lightest parts. And what I do with these lightest parts is that I also sketch in the shadow parts with that light color, because that already gives me the dimensionality and the insight into the volume of the building. And I can only do I can already do that with just one color, but starting with all the light shades, like here, this let me make, yeah, got my red brush. So here an E41, and probably, let me put that there. Thank you, Photoshop. And a very light blue there, which will probably be a Winsor Newton. And I have to just check, it's a C719, which is a very light shade of blue. Start off with really with the lightest stuff, and slowly building up the darks. And what you see here is, if I quickly just make this a gray version, you see that underneath these two sunshades, these awnings, I make it darker, and that's something that you can really use to your advantage. I'll exaggerate it even more here, just for illustration's sake. If you make this dark and you leave some of these protruding parts here in the light, you can really exaggerate, like, okay, there's something dark underneath this, and this automatically starts to look lighter than that. That's a technique that I often use in the way that I sketch. Getting this back to the color. And here you can also see, if you switch quickly from color to just light and dark values, you see the relationship between it. And that's also one of the most important aspects of when you choose color. Look at the light and dark value relation between the color and the lightness of it. If you have that right, the colors more or less do not matter that much. They may be hideous, but you will still be able to read your shapes. You will still be able to read the volumetrics of your building. That's something to keep in mind. The darker shades, in this case, I used a lot of Copic, and that is, put it back to red. For instance, here, that's a Copic BV23, and I have two darker ones. That is this one right here. That's a Copic BV25, and the darkest one, that's a Copic BV29. These are the defining, and especially the two darker ones, the BV25 and the BV29, are the defining volume markers, if you will, in this sketch. But you can also see that here this lighter reddish, or yeah, this rusty kind of color, if I make it, switch it back to dark, you see that this is really quite a dark shade, not as dark as this BV29, but you see that it is in the darker range, even though it looks like, okay, this is bright and red. Same goes for here for these bright looking oranges kind of colors. If I switch it back to grayscale, you see that they actually fall within this shaded range and recede back, and your eye will still read that and make sense of it. So that's really a very important thing to keep in mind when you start coloring your stuff. Here I used a red, and I have to look to the side because that's where my markers are. That's an R17, and here there's an E53, which is like a yellowish kind of earth color, and I use a little darker variation of that here. That's probably like an R46. These are all Copic colors. For me personally, hey, look at all the nice lines and arrows. For me personally, Copic at the moment is one with the biggest range in color and, more importantly, range in value. The Winsor Newtons tend to dry just a tad lighter, and you will have a lot of difficulty getting these really dark, contrasty areas. That's something that I've discovered over the years. Winsor Newton doesn't give me that, and Copic does. So, but things can change. I've been given a set of evaluation markers from both Olo and Ohuhu, and in a next session I will be working with these markers as well. But for the moment, for me, I mainly use Copic and Winsor and Newton. And that's because I have some favorite colors in the Winsor Newton range that I use, and that is maybe they are even they have equivalents in the Copic range, but this one, which is the Y7, no, this one is the Y717, and let me get rid of that one. So this is Y717, the lighter one, and you have the darker shade, which is the Y616. This combo, I use it all the time, and that's one of my favorite Winsor and Newton teams, if you will. And also, I use it a lot there. That's on Winsor and Newton. Have to quickly look. It's an R, if I read it, R937. That's also a color. And this is from Winsor and Newton as well. So these are Winsor and Newtons. But for most of the contrasty work, I always use my Copics because they really push down things. Okay, that's so much for the coloring phase. And the last the thing before last, two things. When I have done my main coloring, things are looking pretty dark, and especially here, if I just get rid of everything except just the screen. The fun starts with using my Posca. It's a white acrylic pen, and I use this one. It's a small. I also have a bigger one, the big guy. So these two, the bigger one I use for areas like here, where I can make these really bold dashes. You can see one here, you can see one there. And once I've done that, once I've applied it, you also see that I not only have like a white acrylic pen, I also have this orangey one, I have a yellow one, and I also have a blue one and a pinkish one, which I use with measure. Not too much, because it's fun that things work, but if you do it all over the place, things start to look really very nasty and busy and chaotic. And talking about chaotic, as soon as you do your white acrylic pen stuff, things, let me quickly grab a color, things are going to look chaotic, because what happens if you, I'm just doing this with a brush now, with a digital brush, but if you only use white lines all over the place, things start to lose depth. And what you can see in my sketch is that once I have done that, and here's a really nice example of a region where I do that. Once I have all this white in place, I take a darker marker, usually like a Copic, a cool gray number 5 or number 6 or number 7, and brush lightly. These ones you will have to wait until they dry, because otherwise you will just wipe them out. This is water-based, the Poscas, so you need to give it a little time to dry. It doesn't take too long, but you need to do that, because otherwise your marker will dissolve the pen strokes. But once it has dried, quickly, just like with one stroke over it, I'll do a red one just to show direction and intention, like once over it and you're done. So not like painting over it over and over and over again, because that will also like destroy the Posca lines, and that's not what you want to do. You would just want to do one pass. And if you do that, let me do that with a 50% one, a darker color. If you do that and just brush over something, you get this light or slightly darker pass over something, and that's exactly what you want. You want to have this marker trace still visible, and that's something that you see here, where you see this marker trace in this area, and that's what makes your white lines generate even more depth. If it's just white, it starts to hang out in front of your sketch. If you push it back, that's when your sketch starts to get more and more dimensionality as well. And it's the layered approach of your marker coloring is also something that gives you a really nice richness in texture, a richness in color. You get mixed colors. Here you can see an area where you see lots of different color variations, and it makes it interesting to see, interesting to look at. Also here, lots of nice color interaction, and that is because the colors are transparent. The alcohol ink is transparent, and it's a joy to look at. So here we go. So Dave, I hope you like my explanation. For everybody else who thinks, hey, Why not make a video about this or that topic? Let me know in the comments and I will see what I can do. I will see you next time. Thank you for joining. Bye bye.